Now we understand that it's really important to empathize with your customer, to try to get into his or her head and really understand the deep-seated reasons for wanting your products or services. So the next question becomes, how can we do that? What are the techniques we can use to accomplish this objective? How can we generate what marketing researchers call consumer insights? As you probably realize, there are many methods out there. No method is necessarily better than another. They're often used in combination with other methods, and every circumstance, every context calls for a different kind of approach. So let's take a few minutes just to review the major techniques for generating consumer insights. Generally speaking, we can divide insight methodologies into two kinds: qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative techniques generally are deep techniques. That is, they are going to probe deeply into the thoughts and experiences of a relatively small number of people. They may or may not be generalizable to a very large population, but the richness of the results often makes it worthwhile to use a qualitative technique. Many insights people will tell you that the best strategy is to start with qualitative techniques, to do what they call exploratory research, to really get your hands around what the issues are, and then to bring in one or more quantitative techniques that usually involve some kind of numerical values. These allow us to calculate various kinds of scores, averages, and so on, and thus we can generalize to much larger groups of people. So one widely used qualitative technique is the interview, sometimes called the mall intercept, because shopping malls are a very common place for these interviews to occur. And as you might guess, in an interview scenario, we're going to pretty much stop people as they're walking down the street or through the mall, and perhaps they meet certain criteria that we've determined beforehand, and the interviewer is going to ask them a set of questions. They may actually show them a few items and get their responses and so on. But essentially, these man-on-the-street interviews, if you will, are valuable for getting very quick reactions from passersby. Again, not very generalizable necessarily, but very useful for getting a reality check about certain ideas. Focus groups are the single most widely used marketing research technique. At this moment in time, there are literally hundreds or probably thousands of focus groups being conducted around the United States at various facilities. So a focus group, unlike a in-person interview, usually consists of a assembly of about 8 to 10 to 12 people who meet some criteria, and they're going to sit in a room with a professional moderator, and they're going to discuss an issue maybe for 45 minutes, maybe for an hour, maybe even for 2 hours. It's very common for the client to sit in on the other side of a one-way mirror to watch this exercise taking place. The reason it's called a focus group is that the moderator's job is to focus the discussion, that is, to keep it focused, to keep it directed on the issues that the client is concerned about. An ethnography is a variation of a technique that has long been used by anthropologists. Now, the way anthropologists do this is a bit different because they will often actually go to, so to speak, live with the natives. That is, in order to study what's going on inside a society, you need to be accepted by the people who live in that society, and they tend to act differently when there's some outsider standing there with a clipboard writing down everything they do. So in a true ethnography, the researcher might embed him or herself in a group, in a village, somewhere in the world, and literally may stay there for years in some cases. Now, we, as marketers, don't have the luxury to do that, but nonetheless, we can still do our own version of living with the natives, and what that means is that we can send researchers to in some cases, live with people in their homes, or in others, just to visit the site where some kind of consumption activity is taking place. So in this example that you see here on the screen, researchers were looking at the kinds of restaurants that people use in airports, and this was done for a company that operates eating facilities in many airports around the U.S. This was a real eye-opener for these executives because they actually took on the role of passengers who were grabbing a bite at the airport facility while waiting for their flights and moving through the facility to understand the various pain points that these individuals might experience. So as a result of living that experience, they were able to identify some things they hadn't realized when they designed the facility. So going to live with the natives, again, even in a very abridged way, is extremely valuable to get some deep insights into how people are actually consuming your products or services. I highly recommend it. Some quantitative techniques. First and foremost are surveys. No doubt you're very familiar with these. You've probably participated in many of them, or at least have been asked to participate in many of them. Maybe you've been contacted on the phone, and they always manage to call during dinner, of course. Maybe you've received something in the mail. More likely, today, you've received some kind of online invitation to participate in a survey. So surveys are very valuable for getting large numbers of responses to some very basic questions. It's often difficult to probe very deeply using surveys, but in terms of quantifying the results and generalizing to large numbers of people, they're very valuable. So online surveys are rapidly replacing all kinds of other surveys. People, for various reasons, aren't participating in telephone surveys anymore, and certainly it's very difficult to get them going door to door and just knocking on doors. You're not going to have much luck. So online surveys, especially as many more people are getting access to the internet, at least in developed countries like ours, this is clearly the way to go. And so the technology here continues to evolve as literally almost on a daily basis. Here is an example of a somewhat early survey, and actually one that I designed. And what you can see here is that we're incorporating a lot of visuals into this survey instrument. So surveys don't have to be just bland, boring questions where you give a response from 1 to 5 or something like that. In this particular case, we're asking people for their preferences in terms of how they would furnish a living room. All kinds of product categories you see represented down here, everything from music and artwork to tables and chairs. And they're going through a process where they're first doing what resembles a qualitative technique, actually, where they're selecting a picture of some ideal lifestyle that they really desire, and then they're trying to imagine what that person's living room would look like. So there's a longer story behind this study, as you can imagine, but I wanted to share it with you just to give you a sense of the kind of visual possibilities that are available when you do online surveys, which can be done much less expensively and much, much quicker than old-fashioned surveys. And of course, with the explosion in social media, this has really revolutionized the entire world of consumer insights, and researchers are finding all kinds of new, fascinating ways to mine the vast amount of responses that consumers are making about your products every single day. So people on their own, without being asked by researchers, are spontaneously writing things about any product you can imagine. any product at all, and I've yet to find a product that is not well represented in social media, even relatively mundane or boring products. It's amazing how much time people will spend posting about their experiences or feelings or love or hate or what have you for these products. So a netnography is an example of a technique where researchers are trying to dig down into thousands or in some cases even millions of data points and trying to make sense of what people are doing online. So what you see here is an example of a technique that is sometimes called web scraping, because essentially what you're doing is using sophisticated software that allows you to go out into various social media platforms like Pinterest and Twitter and Facebook, etc., and to identify what people are saying about various products, and perhaps more importantly, what they're saying about related products. So every time you have a mention of a particular product, you want to see what else people are saying. In this case, this was a study that was done for Lindt chocolates, and you can see that there's lots of conversation about various things to do with chocolate. So you can mine this stuff all day long and still have lots of insights left to go. It's just amazing how many things you can learn from what people are spontaneously posting on websites. Other techniques continue to evolve as well. So there's a lot of buzz these days around so-called neuromarketing, which we'll talk about a bit later in the course. And neuromarketing essentially is adapting techniques that medical researchers use to monitor activity in the brain to try to get a handle on what goes on in our brains when we talk about various products or we're exposed to images of different brands. And again, it is still early days in terms of the development of this field, but researchers who do neuromarketing will tell you that it is possible to elicit very different kinds of responses in the brain, and often these are quite different from what people are verbally telling you about what they think about products. So again, it reminds us that there's a lot going on beneath the surface. There's a lot of feelings that people have about brands that they can't necessarily articulate, or at least they're not willing to articulate. So the takeaway from this very, very quick review of marketing research methodologies, and it's about the quickest review I think that's ever been done in history, but I wanted to impress upon you that, first of all, there are many ways to know your customer. It's important to tailor the techniques you use to the situation rather than using the same technique in every situation. And that's a mistake that some insights researchers like to do. They've learned some technique and now they're going to go out and apply it to everything that they do. So I would urge you, as you're thinking about how do I collect these insights, don't be a hammer in search of a nail. In other words, don't just specialize in one technique and assume that that's all you need to answer every single insights question. You'll be robbing yourself of the opportunity to learn so much more about customers by using more than one technique to triangulate and to get a much richer picture.